So this evening's event is part of the library's Our Path Foward Series, which is a series we designed to reaffirm the library's commitment to public discourse and to democracy, and this evening is truly another wonderful example of that. So just a bit about our distinguished guests. I promise I'll make it short, but they really are quite impressive. So Eileen McNamara is the director of the journalism program at Brandeis University and the author of Eunice, The Kennedy Who Changed the World, published this year, and which she's come here to speak about. Yes, thank you very much for holding that up for us. A professor of the practice of journalism since 2007, she was previously an award-winning reporter and columnist for the Boston Globe, where she won a Pulitzer Prize for commentary and contributed to the coverage of the clergy sex abuse scandal in the Archdiocese of Boston. And Mark Feeney, who will be interviewing Eileen this evening, covers photography, film, and art for the Boston Globe. He was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in feature writing in '94 and won a Pulitzer Prize for criticism in 2008. And he's the author of the book Nixon at the Movies, a book about belief. He has taught at Yale, Princeton, and Brown, and is currently on the faculty at Brandeis University. Just a quick plug that Porter Square Books is right outside selling the book that we'll be discussing this evening. We are very thankful for our partnership with them, so please do pay them a visit if you are interested. And without further ado, I'll welcome our distinguished guests. Please join me in welcoming them.
Should we talk like this?
I don't think we need those. Can you hear it? Yes.
Okay.
I know I'm loud.
She really is. I sat next to her for 6 months, and the ears still haven't recovered. Just thank you, Cher, very much. I want to make a correction. Sherry's remarks were accurate, except I want to point out in on the library website, it says that we're both natives of North Cambridge. And while Eileen is, I'm a resident of North Cambridge, but I've only lived there for 32 years. Which by North Cambridge standards means I'm still on probation. I did once take a pair of shoes to John the Cobbler, and he gets his references, and I have eaten Vernon's Donuts. And I did once briefly, if memorably, meet Tip O'Neill. She really well. But as I say, I is a native, and so what I'd like to do is, before we get to Eunice Kennedy Shriver, I'd like to start with Eileen McNamara. And what was it like growing up in North Cambridge way back when, before Cambridge became all high-tech and yuppie, and everybody has cells for 7 figures?
Well, I know I couldn't afford to live there anymore. It was a great neighborhood, with a couple of exceptions. Probably. When it snowed, it was mostly a family neighborhood, North Cambridge. So there were a lot of 2- and 3-family houses, and they were filled with kids in the 50s when I grew up there. But there would always be a couple of Harvard graduate school students who would sneak in somewhere into an apartment and come in with, you knew it was them because they would have out-of-town plates. And they didn't understand the niceties of parking in Cambridge.
You all do, I'm sure.
And my father was a postal clerk here at the Harvard Square Post Office, and during the day. And at night, he worked at the Harvard Wine Liquor Store on Mass Ave. So when he came home from the PO, it was necessary that his parking space be available, because he had to take a nap and then have dinner at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and go to the liquor store. So he had to have a parking space. So if it snowed, the 4 kids were, it was our job to shovel them out so that he could park in there. And then, some little sports car would pull into that space. No doubt, and so it would be our job to push it into the middle of the street so my father could pull it, which we did on one occasion. It was a great neighborhood. We played in the street, we played flashlight tag. It was great. And I lived on Creighton Street, which is a dead end. It dead ended at railroad tracks. So it was really pretty sad.
Creighton was like 2 streets down from Walden. So
it is, yeah.
Probably not corner of 7 Waldens. Creighton's
right.
Square side, Walden. Yeah. And you went to North Cambridge Catholic?
I went to St. John's Grammar School, and I went to North Cambridge Catholic High School.
You did. And
it's condos now. Well, the Cambridge Public Library defined my life as a child. When I was little, on Mead Street, where Mark lives now, there was, in the basement of the Lincoln School,
Which is also now condos.
it was an elementary school where I went to kindergarten, because Catholic school didn't have kindergarten back in the day. There was a library, a little annex of the library, and my mother and I went there every night. And when that was no longer there, we went down near the Fitzgerald School on Ridge Ave to what is now the Millie O'Neill Library, but we always thought of it as my favorite branch, our library. And Miss Finucane helped me pick out all my books. And I distinctly remember
Excuse me, but
yeah,
you actually let someone tell you what to do?
I did, I was very small then.
Very nice.
But she got me started on the path to nonfiction. She didn't give me storybooks to read. She directed me to, some of you might remember these, most of you probably aren't as old as I am, but there were these little tiny biographies that were under orange covers. Yeah? And they were all on the same shelf. And she helped me work my way through those. And I still remember.
And now you're a biographer yourself?
And now I'm a biographer myself. So I credit Ms. Finucane with a lot of this.
Well, as you mentioned, the North Cambridge branch is now officially Mildred, whatever O'Neill.
Yeah, really.
Well, I'm doing the official name. I mean, you're a family friend.
Not
But as Shira mentioned, Eileen won a Pulitzer Prize. And the day after, I remember going with my then 2-year-old son to the O'Neill branch where I spoke very frequently. I was there just yesterday. And there were some people whispering, they're librarians. And I thought I overheard them. What they were saying was that Mrs. McNamara's daughter? I was watching Channel 5 last night. Was that Mrs. McNamara's daughter who won that prize? Excuse me, but yeah, it was.
My mother lived at the North Cambridge branch. She was an inveterate reader, and she just, that was her social life. And then when the bookmobile came in, and it always stopped at Porter Square, near where we lived, so big.
So North Cambridge, like Cambridge back then, was very Catholic, largely Irish, but also French Canadian, Italians, John Cobbler.
Yeah.
How were the Kennedys viewed when you were growing up? I mean, I assume, as many of you know, John F. Kennedy was elected from the 8th Congressional District, which took in a bunch of Cambridge, including North Cambridge, and then Senator, President, and how was it viewed?
Well, we had a picture of the Pope and a picture of the Sacred Heart of Jesus and a picture of Jack Kennedy on the wall. I guess that tells you where he ranked. I don't know if my mother ranked them when she hung them, but reverentially. Of course, reverentially. I mean, it was the first Catholic president of the United States, and it was a long shot for sure that would happen. And I think the neighborhood took enormous pride, and he was no way one of us. They didn't exactly live around the corner, and their experience of life was very different, the Kennedys, than the McNamara's day. But he was one of ours nonetheless.
In a funny way, I never thought of this before, but I'm a little younger than she is, though I'm a great age.
Because I died when
and it's very kind.
Thank you so much.
But from my parents' point of view, neighbors, I think the relationship, especially of Irish Catholics to John F. Kennedy, was not unlike that of African Americans to Barack Obama, who, in style, was very different from many African Americans, but there is still, such an intense connection to Obama, and that's how many people of our parents' generation felt.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair comparison. I think it was pride in the group.
And in a weird way, the fact that, as you said, the McNamaras and the Feeneys weren't like the Kennedys, made the Kennedys all the more to be cherished, because they were an aspiration.
Right.
Do you remember where you were when you heard that John F. Kennedy was shot?
Question. Yes, of course I do. But it was in Sister Catherine Martin's class at St. John's Grammar School. And the first bulletins that apparently reached Cambridge before he died, before we knew he was dead, because we were all told to get on our knees, and we did. And we prayed for the president. And then the nuns were all gathering in the corridors talking. It was from the radio on in the principal's office or something. And she came back in, and she got us off our knees and told us that we were going home early today, and that we were not to speak on the walk home. You know, we had a neighbor, you could hold your neighbor's hand as you walked home. You know, I walked down Mass Avenue to get to Creighton Street, and we didn't know he was dead. And we knew he had been shot, but when I walked in the house, I knew he was dead. My mother was just inconsolable.
So certainly growing up, you were aware of the president, and I assume, to a lesser degree, the junior senator in Massachusetts, his youngest brother, perhaps also Bobby, senator, excuse me, future senator, and then attorney general. Bobby and I were still young, very young, you were aware of them. What about the Kennedy sisters? Were you aware of them?
No, they were the decorative accessories standing behind them when they were campaigning, or when they had those fabulous tea parties, like the Hotel Commander. That's where I had my wedding reception. And my mother said, "Do you know what this is?" And I said, "Yes, I do." Yeah. So they were there. They certainly campaigned for their brothers, and they dressed up in beautiful dresses and had tea parties, but that's about all they thought.
If Eunice Kennedy Shriver, had been named Eunice Kenworth, how would that have been?
Well, I think more to the point, all of our lives would be different. I think the thing about Eunice was because a political career was not available to her, because she was a Kennedy woman and not a Kennedy man, she basically hijacked her father's fortune and her brother's political power, and she pushed her way into rooms all over the world where powerful people could make decisions that would help her constituency, which was children with intellectual disabilities. So how would her life have been different? She wouldn't have had access to that money and that power to be able to do what she wanted.
Well, let me rephrase it. As it happened, Eunice Kenworth, or whatever it is.
Yes.
The Kenworths were fabulous.
Okay.
And they had power, they had a president.
Right.
So she did have access to money and influence, but she doesn't have a famous name.
Mm-hmm.
Would that have liberated her, or she still would have been a prisoner of?
No, it wouldn't have liberated her, because she still would have been a prisoner of the times. I mean, I think that Eunice's story is the story of so many women in mid-20th century America who were capable, often more capable than their brothers, or whose career was being advanced by their parents' great wealth. It was very hard to get seen in that era, no matter how fiercely intelligent or ambitious you were, and she was both. I don't think it would have mattered, but I think she was enough of a political strategist that she figured out how to harness the money and the power for her own purposes.
Now, when you were a little girl, you weren't aware of Eunice Kennedy Shriver, but then as you got older, you became a prize-winning political reporter. You certainly became aware of her. How did the view that you had of her when you started change from the view that you have of her now? Or did it?
Well, I have to say I had a fairly limited view of her, and I think most people did.
Did you ever encounter her?
I did. I mean, I certainly covered press conferences in which she held forth without Chicago's hordes of Hobbes to tell us we ought to pay attention to children. Just what
Could you do the rest of this?
I could, but I don't think I always look around to make sure there are no strivers in the room. Now I've distracted myself.
You did cover her a few times.
Yeah, I did. I mean, you couldn't work at the Boston Globe for 30 years and not encounter the Kennedys in one form or another. So, sure, but I did not know her. And she certainly wasn't an intimate. She wasn't even somebody who I knew at all. When I covered Congress, I got to know Senator Ted Kennedy pretty well. So I knew him and through him, her.
And this would have been the 80s.
Yeah, during Reagan.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, during the 80s. So I got to know him quite well, and she was still pretty influential. So we'd run into her on the Hill, but that's about it. It was pretty cursory. So when I undertook this biography, I probably knew about as much about her as you, which was she started Special Olympics, right? So she must be a nice, lady bountiful kind of person. Turned out, not found much, not warm and fuzzy, not an errorist do-gooder at all. Really a hard-bitten political activist. I wouldn't have guessed that. I didn't know that.
She got things done.
She got things done, and she got things done years before Jack, Bobby, and Ted even recognized what the issues were. I mean, she was in Washington 2 years before Jack went to come to the House in 1947, working for the State Department. In 1947, she worked for the U.S. Justice Department on issues of juvenile delinquency for the Attorney General's office. When you look back at newspapers from that period, from the late 40s, if you see Kennedy in the headline, they're talking about Eunice. They are not talking about Jack. Because he was a really indifferent congressman. He didn't like the House, he didn't like the pace of legislation, so he wasn't paying a whole lot of attention. Plus he was pretty ill in those years. She was on fire. She traveled all around the country to visit institutions where juvenile offenders were held, and she railed against those conditions, as she would later rail against the conditions in which children with intellectual disabilities were housed. So she got there first, and she got there ferociously on lots and lots of issues. Bobby did tackle juvenile delinquency when he was the Attorney General in 1961, formed a presidential commission on juvenile delinquency. Why? Because Jack told him to. And why did Jack tell him to? Because Eunice told Jack.
Well, one of the arguments of your book, and it first surprised me, but by the time I finished the book, I did finish it, and it wasn't hard to finish. It's a really good book. Again, copies are available. And the library also has copies, which is on the table.
Well, yes, I do. I grew up in the library.
Is in actual practical terms, I mean, the Kennedys as an inspiration to some people, the room so large, but actual practical effect in people's lives terms of that generation, siblings, she was the one that made the biggest difference.
That's my argument, and I can defend it. I mean, really, who left a profound a legacy as she did? I mean, let's be fair that Jack and Bobby's lives were cut short. We have no idea what they might have accomplished, what they could have accomplished. Ted left a great legacy in the United States Senate, the Liberal Lion. We all know his history. But in terms of people's day-to-day lives, it's hard to remember now, but until 1975, a child did not have a right to a seat in a public school classroom if he or she had intellectual disabilities. They have that right because of Eunice Kennedy Shriver. Her name's not on the bill, she drafted the bill. When you think about Special Olympics, you think about the right to play, just the right to play. These children were housed in institutional settings, or they were hidden at home. She kicked open those doors. The last piece of legislation Jack Kennedy ever signed was a bill to deinstitutionalize these children. She had a very, very short time to bathe in the glow of his admiration for what she had accomplished, because she put the committee together that drafted that legislation that he signed, because 3 weeks later he was assassinated. It's worth noting that Eunice wasn't on the presidential panel on mental retardation. Why not? Well, she said later it would have been unseemly for the sister of the President of the United States to be serving in an official capacity. And we know that Bobby felt exactly the same way. So never.
Being sarcastic.
That was, I think they got that. There was one set of rules for the Kennedy men and another set of rules for the Kennedy women. And there were some of those rules she had to obey. She didn't run for public office. But she mostly found her way around the rules. And that's why she's left the legacy she's left. Because she didn't listen. She did what she wanted to do.
In the many years she's been working on this book, what most surprised you?
How long it took to get the Shrivers to all agree to cooperate with me. You know, I think that's sort of the secret of biographies in some ways. You think that if the hard work is going to be in the archives, or interviewing people, or in the writing, that's not where the work is. The hard work is to convince people to do what goes against their natural instincts. Hi, you don't know me. I want to write about a biography about your mother. You won't have any say in the content of that book. You won't even have an opportunity to read it before it's published. But by the way, I would like you to give me access to all of her personal papers. The ones you've never read, the ones you might have read. Of course, people are going to be reluctant. They don't know you. And they don't trust you. And if your last name or your middle name is Kennedy or Shriver, you've seen lots of biographies that have been hit jobs on your family. You've also seen plenty of hagiographies that canonize them. And I was proposing to write neither. I was just saying, I'd like to tell your mother's story, and I need your help to do it. So that was the biggest surprise, is how long that can take.
Well, the biggest surprise to me in hearing the work was done. I assume many, perhaps all of you have seen the movie Spotlight. And if you have, if you think back to the opening, she's a character. She has lunch with Marty Barons, played by Louis Schreiber. And you told me that after the movie was released, that seemed to affect your relationship with Schreiber.
Yeah, it basically opened the floodgates. I couldn't get them to return my calls or my emails, even though by then they had agreed to cooperate in the book. But they're all very busy people, and they all have really serious jobs, and I understood that. But it was very funny, the weekend that the movie premiered, suddenly bing, 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 all over my email. And I just saw Spotlight. They live in different parts of the country, but they all, for whatever reason, went to the movies that weekend. And they chose that picture. It must have rained that weekend. And the Kennedys were enamored of Hollywood. So are the Shrivers. I mean, Maria has now close association with Hollywood. So I think that gave a kind of a legitimacy to me that curiously the Pulitzer didn't give. And that's okay. It worked. They were a little more forthcoming after that. And trying to get access to the papers was complicated. Once I had finally secured their agreement that I could read them, the logistical nightmare happened with the Kennedy Library because they had never deeded the papers to the library. They had just put them in storage. So archivists hadn't gone through them, they hadn't cataloged them, they were just boxes of paper. Nobody knew what was in them. Tim Sharma said to me, I don't know why you're so fixated on getting those boxes. I'm sure there's nothing in there but old VHS tapes of Maria on the Today Show. There were no VHS tapes of Maria on the Today Show, but there was a lot of the great material in those boxes. So I had to convince that, because the National Archives that runs Kennedy Library couldn't show them to me, I had to convince Tim to take them out of it so I could read them. Then I had to convince not to send them to Washington, where Special Olympics is headquarters, but to send them to Brandeis. And then the Brandeis archives wouldn't take them because they weren't deeded to them, so I was in a great catch-22. But I eventually convinced Brandeis to give me a secure room in the library, not in the archives, just from the library itself that only I would have access to, where I could read the papers.
And where are they now?
They're back at Special Olympics.
And have they been cataloged?
They have not, and the Kennedy Library won't take them back unless they're deeded to them, which is the right thing to do. Yeah, it was a lot, but it was really, you know, that was sort of in many ways the most fun part of this project because you never knew what you were going to find. Robert Caro, the great biographer of Lyndon Johnson, says a biographer's job is to turn every page. And so that meant, you know, you're knee-deep in news clippings from the 30s. And if you don't turn the page, you don't find the letter from an inmate in a federal penitentiary in West Virginia who Eunice had befriended. She was in for treason. She was a spy for Japan during World War II. Why would Eunice be friends with a spy from Japan from World War II when she had a brother killed in World War II and another brother seriously injured in the Pacific Theater? It was a great question that I didn't know the answer to when I turned the page. But then I was able to track that story, and there were lots of stories like that. There was a Tory MP named Hugh Fraser, who was later married to Lady Antonia Fraser, the biographer. And he was in love with Eunice in the 40s. Who knows? There were just wonderful things. His love letters were in her files, just thrown in there, willy-nilly. Every day I never knew what I would encounter.
Did the kids ever come and say, I had no idea?
They did when they read the book.
Yes, right.
But they had, they sort of have a distinct lack of curiosity about their family. And, I mean, in some ways, I guess it's understandable. There's too much out there. So what the next generation of the Kennedys generally do is they designate somebody to read the book. So they know whether they're good, bad, indifferent, inflammatory, what they are. There's just too much stuff. Plus, they grew up with a mother who did not like to look backward. So if she walked through the family room and the television was on and there was a special on the Kennedy assassination, that television went on immediately. She once drove to the Potomac School in Maryland where one of her kids was enrolled and one of Ethel's kids was enrolled, and she pulled the two kids out because she heard that that day in their history class they were doing a unit on the Kennedy assassination. So the environment they grew up in said, don't talk about it. Mommy doesn't want to talk about this. So they never did. They never asked. And they were never told.
Now, was that true just of the assassination and grim things, but also triumphs?
Oh, no. She was happy to tell the great achievements of the Kennedy family, but anything that had a cloud or a shadow over it was not discussed. It was so poignant and surprising to me that the only time I interviewed any of the siblings together, I flew out to California to talk to Bobby and Maria, because they're the oldest, and I had to convince them. I met everybody else, and they had all signed off, but Bobby and Maria were clearly going to be the hard nuts to crack. And as we were chatting, the issue of the president's assassination came up, and Maria turned to Bobby and said, how did you find out? And after he told her that Rags, who was the chauffeur, had picked him up at school and told him in the car that Uncle Jack was dead, they went and picked Maria at her school, and Bobby told him. And then they went in the den and watched TV like everybody else in America, because Eunice flew to Hyannisport to be with her parents, and Sarge was at the White House planning the funeral. They never came home.
You mentioned Sarge. To those of us of a certain generation, our Sergeant Shriver was a very big deal. In some ways, he was more Kennedy than Kennedy. He was a better Catholic. He was a very able administrator. In some ways, this is also a little bit of shadow biography of him. How do you feel about him? How important was he?
It love him. If you read this biography, you will love him too. Sergeant Schreiber was a wonderful human being. And I don't know what more you can say about him, but he was a deeply religious man, which I think influenced most of his life. She was a deeply religious woman, likewise her. But he had a gentleness about him. I'll just tell you that one senator that I interviewed said, if I could raise anyone from the dead for one last meal, one last enriching conversation, it would be Sergeant Schreiber. And if I could keep one person in their grave for all eternity, it would be Eunice. And as soon as he said it, he said, you might want to leave that out of the book because I don't want to offend the kids. But it was really sincere. And it was because she was a prickly personality and not warm and not maternal. And Maria told me, and I quote her in the book, saying, my parents had their roles reversed. He was the maternal figure in that family. He used to slip notes under their door at night, congratulating them on a great point they had made at dinner, or wishing them well on the math test that was the next day. He took the queen bed out of his room, and he installed 2 twin beds, so that if anybody got scared in the night, they could bunk in with Dad. Eunice had her own bedroom, and she locked the door when she went to bed at night so that nobody would disturb her. And in her defense, she was a sickly woman, and she had trouble sleeping. Her son, Bobby, described her as a working addict. She took pills to go to bed at night and other pills to get her up in the morning. So they had a very different experience in their childhood. And the Schreiber children, of all of the generation of the extended Kennedy clan, are the people you don't hear about because they don't get arrested for heroin possession or for skiing into a tree while playing touch football. They do not reckless. Anthony runs Best Buddies, which is a group for children with intellectual disabilities.
And Tom Brady is involved with it, so others.
Right. And Mark Schreiber is the vice president of Save the Children. Tim Schreiber runs Special Olympics. Maria runs a foundation for Alzheimer's research because that's what took her father's life. Bobby does these records. He's well connected in Hollywood that are called A Very Special Christmas, where he gets the biggest pop stars in the world to record Christmas music and the proceeds go to special music. So they're all deeply involved in the good works that their parents launched them on.
I want to backtrack for a minute. You mentioned Bob Caro and turning the page. In writing this biography, how did it change how you read and understand biography as a genre? I mean, now when you read a biography, is it the same as 7 years ago?
No, I look at the notes a lot more than I used to. Because you just see these assertions that get made in biographies. And I think that maybe, in my less practiced life, skimmed over those assertions. How do you know? Who said? Mark did me the enormous favor of reading this book before I submitted it, the manuscript before I submitted it. And there were a few of those questions that he had for me. How do you know? And there were some really poignant, powerful anecdotes that didn't make the final cut because of Mark, because before I submitted it.
If you dislike the book after you bought it, it's probably because
It's his fault. No, but there were things that Lou Kennedy told me that were very powerful. But the only person that could have corroborated those anecdotes was Bobby, and Bobby's no longer with us. I tried to track down documents that would support the stories. I believe the stories she told me were true. I couldn't prove them, so they're not in there. And I read biographies now, and I think, wow, there's a lot of undocumented stories that make it into print.
you remind me of my sister. As some of you may know, magazines have fact checkers. Newspapers don't have fact checkers. Books don't have fact checkers, but magazines do. And she was a fact checker at Vanity Fair back in the 80s. And there was a biography of Eunice's older sister, Kathleen, but her name was Kik. And those of you who are Kennedy, I won't say addicts, but Kennedy files will know that Kik Kennedy died in a plane crash. And so an excerpt from this biography was sent to Vanity Fair. And as my sister told me, there were two writers, Collier and Horowitz, and they described what Kik Kennedy was thinking as the plane crashed. No one survived the plane crash. So my sister said, Collier, what is your source on this? And he said, oh, well, so
Yeah. There's a lot of that out there. And I think as readers, it's on us to be skeptical. And if you can't back it up, it shouldn't be in the book.
Right. Excuse me. So, do you feel you know her?
Yes, I absolutely know her.
Was there a point where you just kind of, you woke up and said, oh yeah?
No, I mean, I spent 7 years on this book. And I'd wake up some days and I knew one part of her, and then suddenly all the many parts of her that I knew were integrated.
Yeah.
And that's when I started writing. I couldn't start writing it until then. And other biographers told me, it's not a bad idea to write chapters as they're fresh. Like write her youth when it's fresh in your mind after you've done all this research. I mean, I went to London to go to the convent school where she had gone in high school when her father was the ambassador to the St. James. And it was fresh, I could describe it, but I just wrote those notes to myself. I couldn't write her story until I knew all of it. I had to see the whole picture of her life.
Do you like her?
No. I admire her enormously. She's a difficult person to like. But do the people who admire Steve Jobs like him? From what I gather, reading his biography, not so much. But that doesn't get asked so much about men. It just gets asked about women. And I think, no, she wasn't conventionally likable. She was brutal on her assistants. She was tough on her kids. She taught them to work hard and to achieve and to give back and to contribute. But she wasn't soft with them. Maria says she never told us she loved us. That's not that unusual in that generation of Irish, for one thing, but I think it was particularly unusual in her. And it was because her mother never told her. And I think it was very hard for Eunice to be something that she hadn't had models for her. And what she did was she took her public ambitions, and she had to create that out of whole cloth because there was no model. And she put all of her energy there. So there was no maternal role model, and she fumbled in that role. Maria says, I loved my mother, I miss my mother every day. I was never going to be the kind of mother that my mother was. And she's very affectionate with her kids.
I think one of the fascinating things about the Kennedys, at least to people our age who grew up with the myth, the legend, was Rose was presented as this perfect, wonderful mother, and even among Kennedy acolytes, it was understood Jo was a bastard, a wicked bastard, as we would say. In fact, in terms of, correct me if I'm wrong, but my sense of things, apart from the book before that, is Jo was a really loving father.
Yeah.
And Rose, she was like the mother from hell.
Well, I'm not sure she was the mother from hell, but she was the mother from someplace very chilly. I don't know what that place is exactly, but it was very chilly. I guess that was one of the first revelations to me in researching her childhood at the Kennedy Library and in her private papers. there are all of these letters that Eunice wrote to her mother when her mother was away. And her mother was almost always away and shopping in Paris usually. And dear mommy, I'm so sad you won't be here for the puppet show. Dear mommy, we miss you so much. When are you coming home? Dear mommy, they're all so plaintive. And the other thing that was a revelation is that when you put the chronology together of her travels and of the kids' childhood, you realize this woman that we were told, was the keeper of Catholicism in that house, somehow didn't manage to make it to Kick's first communion or to Joe Jr.'s confirmation. So what's up with that? And as I built the story of Eunice's life, I saw that we really had been sold a bill of goods about Rose. And of course we were. Joe was a master of public relations, maybe one of the first political masters of public relations. What did he tell his kids? It doesn't matter who you are, it matters what people think you are. And I have to say, to Eunice's credit, she took that philosophy and she turned it on its head to the benefit of children with intellectual disabilities. You think they're just poor, downtrodden little children? You watch them in this road race. She changed our perception of the whole population of people by following her father's precept. Not in the way he did, not in the way he did.
One of the things that's most striking about the book, and it's not something I expected, is that, yeah, you got the archival research, and you talk to the families, but throughout it, it's a thread where you talk to families of intellectually challenged kids. And there is such a vivid sense of how Eunice's work affected the lives of everyday people. My question is, did you intend that going in? Did it just sort of happen that way? It's several questions. How important was that for you? And how did that add to the experience?
That's a great question. No one's ever asked me that. And I don't think, I didn't go into this with any intent. I had no idea what it would look like when it came out. But there was a wonderful woman who was about Eunice's age, who lived in West Hartford, Connecticut. And she had been one of the first of the parents to begin agitating for special education for their children, for recreational programs for their children. In the way of all Kennedys, Eunice didn't get there first. She just got there soon enough after to steal a really good idea and promote it and make something of it. There were parents' groups that were popping up all around the country in the 50s who were asking their legislators, asking their communities to do more for these kids. For nothing was being done, essentially, in terms of public expenditures.
1 second. I got this for it. I don't know if any of you have read Taylor Branch's 3 magnificent volumes in the life and writings of King, but that book, besides the biography of Dr. King, is in effect a shadow history of the civil rights movement. In a very real sense, this is a shadow history of the movement for civil rights, if that's the right term, for intellectually challenged kids.
I think it is the right term. I think this movement for intellectually disabled and all disabled people was one of the great unrecognized civil rights movement of the second half of the 20th century. Yes, women's rights, yes, civil rights for African Americans, but also we pulled these kids out of the shadows. They became, their civil rights became like a matter of public interest. Well, when I met this woman, Margaret Tadone, down in West Hartford, where she was in an assisted living facility, she had saved everything from her years as an activist. She got elected to the school board, she got elected to the city council, and it was all because of trying to help her Jimmy. She had twins, one of them contracted encephalitis. Doctors wouldn't listen to her. She said, there's something wrong with this child. They wouldn't listen to her. She was an over-anxious mother. And sure enough, as he progressed, he was an infant when he was taken ill. Something might have been done. He could have been helped. But because no one listened to her, this child was severely damaged intellectually. Her story was the story of hundreds of thousands of parents parents all around this country that were being ignored, especially mothers. And in Eunice's notes, she kept meticulous notes all her life. You can see that one of the things that fuels her is the rage that there was nothing there when her mother tried to help Rosemary, her older sister who was born with intellectual disabilities. And I thought, and I still believe, that Eunice's story is the story of these mothers too. And I wanted them represented in this book. Because when they speak about the struggle, it's not theoretical, it's the struggle they lived through. And I wanted them to have a voice in this biography. And Margaret Tudor went on to serve, maybe under Nixon or Gerald Ford, on the president's panel on what we then call mental retardation, which still existed. The panel still exists, created in 1961 by Eunice Kennedy Shriver, because she would be in the Oval Office saying, you know, God created this panel, and I want the panel to continue.
You sure you want to do the rest of the
Yeah, I listened to an awful lot of tapes of you.
So I want to go back to that question about liking her. You said you did. Fine. Looking back, and of course, to not like someone is not the same thing as to dislike someone.
Right, very true.
But did you find that not liking, was that intellectually or authoritatively? Was it liberating or was it limiting?
It wasn't limiting. I mean, I just realized, even at the outset of this, she and I couldn't be more different in some ways. But I couldn't help but see the parallels in our lives.
What, could you share some of them with us?
Well, she was a pain in the ass. You worked with me for 30 years at the Boston Globe. I was an irritant at my workplace. I think it would be fair to say.
But always in a just cause.
Maybe. That would depend on where you sat. But I can be angry at what I see as injustice. For a long time at the end of my career at the Globe, I had a column which gave me a piece of real estate where I could say what I really thought. And that was very liberating, but there was a lot of anger in a lot of those columns about the social injustice that I saw around me. And I guess in some ways I feel like I channeled her as I was writing her, because I do relate to that part of her personality. The other parts about liking her, I mean, I don't know what that means really. I know we would want to have dinner together. She was 5'10", and she weighed 109 pounds. I'm trying to get to 5'4", but I'm shrinking as I get old, so that's probably not going to happen. And I haven't seen 109 pounds in a long, long time. So we physically couldn't be more different, and I don't play tennis, and I don't know how to sail, and I grew up in a 3-family house in North Cambridge. So I think we wouldn't hang out together, Eunice and I.
So she wouldn't like you?
I don't think she would like me at all, because I love to watch Netflix, and I love to sit on the couch. And she didn't let her kids sit on the couch. And the expression she used with the kids makes absolutely no sense to me or anybody else, but it's called get on to yourself. That's what she would yell at them if she found them on the couch. Get on to yourself. Well, what does that mean? They knew it meant get up, get out, contribute, volunteer, work. And like I said, I like that voice. She wouldn't like me.
We spoke earlier about dealing with the Shrivers in terms of research and getting the confidence. Now that the book's been out, how have they responded?
They're pleased with the book, and that was sort of a surprise to me.
Does it matter to you?
It matters to me that they see their mother reflected in there. The book is honest, an honest appraisal of her. It is unvarnished about her negative qualities. But many of those qualities were explained to me by her children. And it's a very different thing sometimes when you see what you said about your mother in an interview with somebody in print. And I was worried that they might want to pull back. And they didn't. I mean, they said you captured her, essentially. So that was really, it's gratifying to know, and not just from them, but from the people that worked with her for 20 or 30 years, who've shown up at book signings in Washington or something, and they will say you nailed her, and that's good to know.
She had a very complicated relationship with feminism, is that fair to say?
Not as complicated, I think, as feminists would say it was. So Mrs. Schreiber, because she was a devout Catholic, and because she was what the kids on the Brandeis campus today would call a social justice warrior, she believed in the sanctity of life, and for her, life began at conception. So she was opposed to abortion, which was, of course, abortion was on the feminist agenda in the 60s and the 70s, leading up to Roe. It was not on her agenda. It was on her agenda not to have that happen. But I find that in some ways incredibly refreshing about Mrs. Schreiber, because she was intellectually consistent. The reason that she opposed abortion is the same reason she opposed capital punishment, is the same reason she opposed the incarceration of non-violent offenders. You know, the same reason she took many of the positions that she took. On abortion specifically, she saw it as an existential threat to a fetus with Down syndrome. And you know what? She was right, because 90% of fetuses with Down syndrome are aborted in this country. You don't have to agree with her. I don't agree with her about whether women should have access to that procedure, but it is consistent with her views about life and her views that those children didn't have a right
But well, that's, and you address this often in the book, the salient issue or divergence between her and standard feminism, perhaps. I guess more what I'm getting at is she was so independent, so assertive, so able to get them, so efficacious, which I think all can agree with, the feminist things. But she also was Mrs. Schreiber. She also came from a very patriarchal family. Was that more of a tension for her between assertiveness and deference, or did it just kind of work for her?
No, I think one of the things that made her life, her public life, and the work she did easier was she was very entitled. I mean, she grew up very wealthy, and opportunities were closed to her because she was a woman, but other opportunities were there for her because she was an heiress and a very wealthy woman. She had a blind spot about feminism because she didn't see that she was one. She would never have described herself in the 60s or the 70s as a feminist. She wrote essays for the Ladies' Home Journal that when I read them sort of made me laugh about, you know, women with their eagerness to go to work and to find their gratification in the public sphere when really the gratification was in the home, by the home fire. Said the woman who doesn't ever come home because she's working and who doesn't know how to cook and who doesn't tell her children she loves them. So she had this fantastical relationship between what motherhood was and the way she practiced motherhood. She was a career woman. She would have said that phrase with derision, career woman, but that's what she was.
If she'd been born 2 generations later, she would have the trajectory to life.
Well, you know, people ask all the time, she would run for office. Maybe Eunice would have been the president. Eunice was entirely too prickly to have ever been elected to any public office because she was incapable of pandering. She said what she thought. And that's one of the reasons I do like her. That's the part of her that I admire so much. I think she would never have learned to edit herself to being what you need to be a politician in this era or the ones just prior to it. But it was that steeliness in her and, you know, that rough exterior of hers that turned her into a great advocate. There's a lot of ways to practice politics. Not all of them are elected office. She was a political advocate, and she got things done.
switch from Eunice back to you, and then perhaps we can take questions from the audience. What are you proudest of as a journalist? But 30 years as a journalist, you did an awful lot. You won prizes. You've pissed off people, both people you work with and people who were doing bad things out in the world. What are you proudest of?
I don't think there's any single thing. I think I was really lucky to have that platform for a long time, and I guess I'm most grateful for the fact that throughout my career, ordinary people have always opened their door to me and done me the great privilege of inviting me in and telling me their stories and trusted me with their stories, which is, it's not only a great privilege when somebody does it, but it's an enormous risk for the person doing it. And I guess I'm proud that I, over the course of my career in Boston, that I built up enough of a public trust that people did open those doors. And most of the stories that I heard, because of the kind of reporting I chose to do in my career, were painful stories that are hard to tell. So I guess that.
Great.
Okay.
Perhaps some of you in the audience have questions? Perhaps. I've so exhaustively asked questions. Very good, please.
I have a question about Eunice's relationship with the father. When you do your research, did you come across any letters of communication coming back and forth, and then how he influenced the drawing? Obviously.
Well, Eunice was a middle child. Any middle children here? So middle children, reputedly, I'm the baby, so I don't know. But middle children often spend a lot of time trying to say, hey, I'm here too, and get their parents' attention. Eunice's life was about trying to get her father's attention. She had her mother's attention. They went to mass together every day. But she couldn't, when she was home, she couldn't get her father's attention. And her whole life was an effort to do that. Yes, there were great letters in her private papers between her and Joe Kennedy. And they're very loving letters. But some of them are heartbreaking. One in particular that I cite at the start of the book brought tears to my eyes, and I am not a particularly sentimental person, as Mark can tell you. You are advising everyone else in that house on their careers, so why not me? She wrote that letter in the late 1950s, when Jack was in the Senate and they were gearing up for a presidential run for him. And she had basically hijacked the Kennedy Foundation, the charitable organization that Joe created when Joe Jr. died. And she turned its attention exclusively to issues of intellectual disabilities. And she spent millions of his dollars giving grants to Stanford and the University of Wisconsin and Harvard and Johns Hopkins to try to get to the bottom of what was causing intellectual disabilities in children. And for all of that work that she did, and she volunteered in a federal penitentiary in West Virginia, which is where she met the spy. She worked in a juvenile delinquency home in Chicago. She did all of this work, and it just didn't catch his eye at all. And finally, I would say about he and she, that it is no accident that, to me, and I'm her biography's her, so I get to say this, that he had a stroke in December of 1961, and in September of 1962, Eunice wrote an article for Saturday Evening Post in which she outed her sister as having what we then called mental retardation. So in those ensuing months, she convinced President Kennedy that it was time to tell the truth, although of course they never told the whole truth. It was always partial truths. So we didn't know that Rosemary had been lobotomized. We just knew that she had been born with intellectual disabilities. So for me, Joe Kennedy had to lose his voice because he could no longer talk after he had a stroke, for Eunice to find her.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the relationship with Rosemary. I mean, obviously it was tremendously influential in terms of her work, but I was really struck with how much the mother insisted that she take care of her sister.
She essentially assigned her to Eunice, Rosemary to Eunice. Rosemary was not as intellectually disabled as she was sometimes portrayed. Her schoolwork is on file at the Kennedy Library. She looks to have gotten to about 4th grade level. She could do long division, for instance. I still can't. She could print. She couldn't write cursive, but she could print letters and did to her parents. She was presented at court in London when she was a young woman. She was the most beautiful of the Kennedy sisters. She was able to chat socially with people without being conspicuously identified as a person with disabilities. So her needs were real, and Eunice was assigned to her. She had trouble with coordination. Eunice cut up her food. That meant that Eunice sat at the children's table, while brothers and sisters she admired and wanted to be with, Joe and Kick and Jack, were at the grown-up table. And she was consigned there all of her life, and I think that was a frustration for her. She loved Rosemary dearly. Rosemary disappeared when she was 23 years old, when Joe had her lobotomized and she was institutionalized, and instructed the children that they were not to see her, ever, because according to Joe, the doctors advised that the competitive atmosphere of the Kennedy siblings would be not good for her health. I don't know why he chose to instruct them, but I do believe that the fact that she abided by her father's wishes for so long haunted her, because she knew it wasn't right to have abandoned her sister, which is what essentially they all did. It's interesting, what makes her such an interesting subject to me is she's not easy. She's really complicated in the way she looks at the world. Even in the eulogy she gave for Rosemary, when Rosemary died in 2005, she complained bitterly. Oh, I would have won so many more races against Jack if I hadn't had to take Rosemary on his crook. Oh my God, the woman's dead. Can we let her up? I think, but that was her nature. And she was incredibly competitive. Vicki Kennedy told me a hilarious story that didn't make the book. She didn't know how to sail when she married Ted, and learned how in the early 2000s how to sail, and was thrilled one day when she won a race. So Eunice said, I'll give you the party, we'll have a party at my house, we'll have a party at my house. And so they go off to Atlantic Avenue to Eunice's house, and she's taken the entire dining room table and covered it with every single trophy she ever won. And there's hundreds of them. And Vicki said, and I come in with my little cup. And she says, oh, you can put it right there, dear, right there, right over there. She was a competitive person. And even at Rosemary's death, still had a little bit of resentment that she got that assignment.
Yes.
I was curious, I think I heard you say that if resources had been available when Rosemary was young, her parents would have made use of them. That somehow I find a little jarring, that they were so, that Rose was kind of absent and Joe was incredibly concerned with appearances. Would they really have had the emotional wisdom and character to make use of public resources for Rosemary?
Yeah, I mean, they had the resources to make use of every private service that was available, and they did. Rosemary but what that amounted to was sending Rosemary away to residential schools that really were experimental and tested what they were doing. So Rosemary bounced around to a lot of residential schools, starting at a very young age. She was only 11, I think, when they first sent her away. They tried. The resources weren't there. I mean, I think they loved all their children. Families are complicated. I mean, aren't you a kind of complicated relationship with your parents? I mean, I don't think that Joe and Rosemary failed to love their children. And I think they would have done anything for Rosemary if they could have. And, you know, in the dark, scary version of Joe Kennedy, he lobotomized Rosemary and get her out of the way so that we could promote Jack. I just can't accept that, because I've read his letters to Rosemary and hers to him. He loved his daughter. He thought it would work. And the thing about Rosemary is we don't really know her full story, because at the Kennedy Library there are all these pink slips in the archives, and those indicate that material has been removed by the family for privacy issues. And lots of those things that have been removed are her medical records. At some point those will be restored. They weren't destroyed, they were just removed. And I think after Jean's passing, but Jane Kennedy Smith, I mean, she's the last surviving member of that generation. I think the next generation may understand that history demands that the personal privacy they were trying to protect needs to be trumped by history. I hope that that's what will happen. But I don't think he lobotomized her for nefarious reasons. I think she had mental illness that compounded her intellectual disabilities, and that did not emerge until she was in late adolescence and young womanhood. And that's what he was trying to fix. She had terrible rages where she hit everybody in the field.
Any more questions? Well, thank you very much.